The year is 1890. Deep in the monsoon-soaked forests of Kerala, a British colonial surgeon named Dr. William Dymock stumbles upon something that will haunt him for the rest of his life. In a crumbling stone temple, hidden beneath centuries of vegetation and forgotten by time, he discovers manuscripts, palm leaf scrolls wrapped in silk, protected by layers of beeswax and turmeric paste. The text is in Sanskrit, the sacred language of ancient India. When translated, these scrolls reveal surgical procedures so advanced, so precise, that they would not be rediscovered by Western medicine for another 70 years. Cataract surgeries, rhinoplasty, caesarean sections, descriptions of sterilization techniques, anesthesia protocols, and post-operative care that rival modern standards. Dr. Dymock writes in his journal that night, "What I have found today challenges everything I believed about the progression of human knowledge. If this is authentic, then we are not the pioneers, we are merely the rediscoverers." He was right. Tonight we journey into one of the most profound mysteries of ancient Earth, the healing sciences of India, a civilization that practiced brain surgery when most of the world still believed illness was caused by demons. A culture that understood anatomy, pharmacology, and psychology thousands of years before the Renaissance. A tradition so sophisticated that its principles are only now being validated by modern science, and in some cases still beyond our grasp. This is not a story of primitive medicine or folk remedies. This is the story of a lost blueprint, a comprehensive system of healing that saw the human body not as a machine to be fixed, but as a universe to be understood. A science that balanced the physical, mental, and spiritual with a precision that makes our current medical model seem incomplete. From the operating theatres of Taxila to the pharmaceutical gardens of Nalanda, from the diagnostic methods that identified diseases we're still struggling to cure, to the surgical instruments that look eerily similar to what hangs in hospitals today. We're about to uncover how ancient India didn't just practice medicine, they perfected it. The question is not whether they were ahead of their time. The question is, how much have we forgotten? Close your eyes and travel back with me. The year is approximately 800 BCE. The place, the great city of Taxila, nestled in what is now Pakistan, at the crossroads of ancient trade routes connecting India, Persia, and China. The sun rises over stone universities where scholars from across the known world gather, not just to study philosophy or astronomy, but medicine. This is the world into which Sushruta is born. History remembers him as the father of surgery, but that title barely captures the magnitude of his genius. Sushruta was a physician, a teacher, a scientist, and a visionary. His text, the Sushruta Samhita, compiled around 600 BCE, is not merely a medical manual. It is a comprehensive encyclopedia containing over 1,220 conditions, 700 medicinal plants, 64 mineral-based preparations, and detailed descriptions of 300 surgical procedures. But numbers alone cannot convey what this means. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine a surgical theatre in ancient Taxila. The room is filled with the scent of neem and turmeric, natural antiseptics being burned to purify the air. On a stone table lies a patient about to undergo rhinoplasty, reconstructive nose surgery. Perhaps he's a warrior whose nose was severed in battle, or a citizen punished by the brutal judicial system of the time. Sushruta approaches. His instruments are laid out with precision, 121 different surgical tools, each designed for specific procedures. There are scalpels of varying sizes, forceps, scissors, needles, probes, and saws. Some made of steel so pure it would not rust, some with handles carved from aromatic woods that had natural antimicrobial properties. But before he operates, Sushruta does something remarkable. He has his students practice on dead animals, on clay models, on leather, on wood, on gourds filled with water. A surgeon who learns on human bodies alone, he writes, is a butcher, not a healer. Mastery requires repetition in safety before execution in crisis. This is surgical training. In 600 BCE, the procedure begins. Assistants hold the patient still. Anesthesia is administered in the form of wine infused with henbane and cannabis, carefully measured to induce unconsciousness without killing. Sushruta takes a leaf from the patient's cheek, cuts it to size, and grafts it onto the damaged nose using a technique called the pedicle flap method. The edges are sewn with ant mandibles that act as natural sutures. The wound is dressed with honey, ghee, and herbal pastes that prevent infection. This exact procedure would not be seen in Europe until the 16th century, when Italian surgeon Gaspare Tagliacozzi would be called a heretic for attempting it. But Sushruta was not alone. Roughly contemporary to him was another giant, Charaka, the master of internal medicine, whose Charaka Samhita is considered the foundational text of Ayurveda. Where Sushruta focused on surgery, Charaka explored the deeper mysteries: metabolism, immunity, genetics, and the psychological roots of physical disease. Charaka understood something that modern medicine is only now rediscovering. The body is not separate from the mind, and neither is separate from the environment. He wrote of the Tridosha, three fundamental energies, Vata, Pitta, Kapha, that govern all biological processes. Skeptics today might dismiss this as metaphysical nonsense, until they learn that modern research into metabolic types, neurotransmitter balances, and autonomic nervous system regulation is essentially describing the same phenomena in different language. Charaka's diagnostic methods were extraordinary. He taught physicians to examine the pulse at 9 different points with varying pressure, each revealing the state of different organs and systems. He instructed them to observe the tongue, the eyes, the skin, the voice, the gait, even the smell of the patient. He understood that disease announces itself long before symptoms become severe, if you know how to listen. And perhaps most remarkably, both Sushruta and Charaka emphasized ethics. The physician's first duty was not to cure, but to do no harm. They were required to take an oath, predating the Hippocratic Oath by centuries, swearing to protect patient confidentiality, to treat rich and poor equally, to never use their knowledge for harm, and to continuously educate themselves. A physician who does not enter the body of the patient with the lamp of knowledge and wisdom, Charaka wrote, can never treat diseases. He is a messenger of death rather than a healer. These were not primitive healers mixing herbs in huts. These were scientists operating in a framework of knowledge that integrated empirical observation, systematic classification, experimental verification, and ethical practice. But how did this knowledge arise? Where did it come from? According to the ancient texts themselves, this wisdom was not invented, it was revealed. The Atharva Veda, one of the 4 sacred texts of Hinduism dating back to at least 1200 BCE, contains hymns dedicated to healing, medicinal plants, and the structure of the human body. These texts speak of medicine as a sacred science, given to humanity by the Ashwini Kumaras, celestial physicians, gods of medicine who roamed the earth teaching the arts of healing. Mythology? Perhaps. But mythology often preserves historical truth in symbolic form. What these stories tell us is that ancient Indians viewed medicine not as a mechanical skill, but as a spiritual calling, a way of participating in the fundamental order of the universe, which they called Rita, the cosmic law that governs everything from the orbit of planets to the beating of hearts. This philosophical foundation gave Indian medicine something unique, a holistic framework that refused to separate body from mind, individual from environment, treatment from prevention, or cure from cause. It was medicine as ecology, where health was not the absence of disease, but the presence of balance. And this foundation would support discoveries that, even today, seem almost impossible for their time. But here's where our story takes a darker turn, because the greatest tragedy in human history is not the books that were never written. It's the books that were written and then destroyed. Let me take you to the year 1193 CE, the place, Nalanda, in modern-day Bihar, India. For over 800 years, Nalanda has stood as perhaps the greatest center of learning in the ancient world. Its university hosts 10,000 students and 2,000 teachers. Its library, the Dharmaganja, or Treasury of Truth, contains 9 million manuscripts spread across 3 enormous buildings, each 9 stories high. The library sections are named Ratnasagara, Ocean of Jewels, Ratnodadi, Sea of Jewels, and Ratana Ranjaka, Delight of Jewels. Within these walls is preserved the accumulated medical knowledge of millennia, texts on surgery, pharmacology, toxicology, psychiatry, pediatrics, geriatrics, ophthalmology, and more. Commentaries upon commentaries, case studies, clinical trials, experimental results. Then comes Bakhtiar Khilji, a Turkish military commander. His army sets Nalanda ablaze. The library burns for 3 months. 3 months. The smoke is said to darken the sky for miles. Scholars flee with what manuscripts they can carry, but most are lost. 9 million texts reduced to ash. This is not the only assault on Indian medical knowledge. It is merely the most symbolic. When the Mughal invasion swept through India, then the European colonization that followed, ancient Indian medicine faced a systematic erasure. It was dismissed as superstition, as native medicine, as primitive folk practice unworthy of serious study. The British colonial government actively discouraged Ayurvedic practice, shut down traditional schools, and promoted Western medicine as the only legitimate healing art. But here's the profound irony that history loves to serve. Many of the discoveries that would later be celebrated in Western medicine were sitting in those burning libraries, written centuries earlier. Consider these examples. Plastic surgery, Sushruta's Rhinoplasty technique, developed around 600 BCE, would not be discovered in the West until 1794, when British physicians in India witnessed the procedure being performed and wrote about it in the Gentleman's Magazine of London. The British surgeons were astounded and quickly claimed credit for advancing the technique. Cataract surgery. Sushruta described a procedure called couching, where a curved needle is used to push the clouded lens down and out of the optical axis. Archaeological evidence suggests this surgery was performed successfully in India as early as 800 BCE. Europe would not develop cataract surgery until the 18th century. Sterilization. Ancient Indian surgeons understood infection and contamination. They boiled instruments, used flame sterilization, fumigated operating rooms with medicinal smoke, and washed hands with specific herbal solutions. Sushruta wrote, "The surgeon must purify his instruments in fire and water, for invisible seeds of death cling to unpurified metal." This is germ theory. 2,500 years before Pasteur and Lister. Anesthesia. The ancient Indians used a sophisticated combination of substances to induce surgical anesthesia, including cannabis, opium, henbane, and alcohol in precisely measured doses. They understood dosage, tolerance, and the danger of overdose. Yet Western medicine would not develop reliable anesthesia until the 1840s, and when they did, they used ether, a substance that ancient Indian texts had described and warned against due to its unpredictable effects. Caesarean section. The Sushruta Samhita contains detailed instructions for performing emergency caesarean delivery, including when it's indicated, how to cut, and crucially, how to suture the uterus and abdominal wall in layers to prevent hemorrhage and infection. This procedure was considered impossible in the West until the late 19th century. But perhaps the most stunning example is this. The ancient Indians understood genetics, not in the modern sense of DNA and chromosomes, but in the fundamental principle. Charaka wrote about heredity, about how traits pass from parents to children, about how certain diseases run in families. He described what we now call genetic predisposition, the idea that some people are born with tendencies towards certain conditions. Even more remarkably, the ancient embryology texts describe fetal development with astonishing accuracy. They knew conception required both male and female contributions. They correctly described the stages of embryonic growth, stating that the heart forms first, then the limbs, then the sense organs, a sequence modern embryology confirms. They even estimated gestation periods for different animals with surprising precision. How did they know this? Without microscopes, without ultrasound, without any of the technology we consider essential. The answer lies in something the modern world has largely abandoned: systematic observation over centuries. Ancient Indian physicians dissected cadavers, not in secret or as heresy, but as formal training. Bodies of executed criminals, unclaimed dead, and those who donated their bodies to science were carefully studied. But more than that, they observed living processes. They studied wounds as they healed. They documented pregnancies from conception to birth. They kept detailed records spanning generations, allowing them to track hereditary patterns. And they asked questions, constantly. Why does this herb reduce fever? What happens if we combine these substances? Why does this surgery work in some patients but not others? What do successful healers do differently than unsuccessful ones? This was not mysticism. This was empiricism, the scientific method practiced with religious dedication. But there's a deeper mystery here, one that modern science is only beginning to confront. Many of the ancient Indian medical claims, dismissed for centuries as impossible or fantastical, are now being validated by research. And in some cases, the ancient knowledge appears to be more advanced than our current understanding. Take, for example, the concept of Ojas, described in Ayurvedic texts as the subtle essence of all vital fluids, the foundation of immunity and vitality. For centuries, this was considered metaphysical nonsense. Then modern immunology discovered something that functions exactly as the ancient text described Ojas: the interstitial fluid, the immune factors, the communication molecules between cells that coordinate systemic responses. The language is different, but the concept is identical. Or consider Marma points, 107 specific locations on the body where the ancient texts say consciousness, life force, and physical structure intersect. Damage to these points, according to Sushruta, causes death or serious dysfunction. These were dismissed as mystical until modern anatomy revealed that Marma points correspond exactly to locations of major nerve plexuses, vascular bundles, and acupuncture points. They are real anatomical structures with real clinical significance. Time and again, this pattern repeats: dismissal, then rediscovery, then reluctant validation. But perhaps the greatest conflict, the deepest challenge posed by ancient Indian medicine, is philosophical rather than technical. Western medicine, for all its achievements, operates on a mechanistic model. The body is a machine. Disease is malfunction. Treatment is repair. It's reductionist. Break everything down into smaller parts until you understand the mechanism, then intervene at that level. Ancient Indian medicine rejected this model entirely. They saw the body as a dynamic system, constantly in flux, embedded in larger systems of environment, society, consciousness, and cosmos. Health was not a fixed state, but a continuous process of adaptation and balance. Disease was not an invader, but a manifestation of imbalance. And healing was not about eliminating symptoms, but about restoring harmony. This is why Ayurveda has no diseases in the Western sense. Instead, it has vikruti, patterns of imbalance. Two people with the same Western diagnosis might receive completely different treatments because their underlying patterns are different. Modern medicine is only now, reluctantly, beginning to embrace this complexity through fields like psychoneuroimmunology, systems biology, and personalized medicine. We're discovering that the ancient Indians were right. You cannot treat the body without treating the mind. You cannot heal the individual without considering their environment. And you cannot eliminate disease without understanding health. But here's the profound tragedy. So much was lost. The libraries burned. The oral traditions were broken. The living lineages of teachers and students were disrupted by invasions, colonization, and modernization. We have fragments, pieces, incomplete texts with missing sections. Imagine what we could know if those 9 million manuscripts still existed. Imagine the diseases we could cure, the suffering we could prevent, the mysteries we could solve. And yet, what remains is still extraordinary. What survived the flames, the floods, the forgetting? These fragments alone have revolutionized how we think about healing. Which brings us to the most important question of all. What did they discover that we still haven't rediscovered? What secrets are still locked in the remaining texts, waiting for minds prepared to understand them? The year is 1991. Dr. Rustom Roy, a materials scientist at Pennsylvania State University, is conducting research on something seemingly unrelated to ancient medicine: the behavior of water under different conditions. He discovers that water can maintain structural memory, that it can be altered by electromagnetic fields, by substances dissolved in it, even by information imprinted upon it. This finding is controversial, disputed, revolutionary. It also provides the first potential scientific mechanism for something ancient Indian medicine had claimed for thousands of years: that water can be medicine. Ayurvedic texts describe elaborate methods of preparing medicinal waters, not just herbal infusions, but water processed in specific ways, stored in specific vessels, exposed to specific conditions. Water treated with mantras. Water charged with gemstones. Water prepared under particular astronomical conditions. For centuries, this was considered pure superstition. Then Dr. Roy's research suggests maybe it wasn't. Maybe the ancient Indians understood something about the properties of water that we're only now beginning to glimpse. This is happening across multiple fields. Ancient Indian knowledge, once dismissed, is being validated, rediscovered, and integrated into modern practice. Let me show you how. Turmeric and curcumin. For thousands of years, Ayurvedic medicine used turmeric, curcuma longa, to treat inflammation, digestive issues, skin conditions, and wounds. Modern research has now identified curcumin, the active compound in turmeric, as one of the most powerful anti-inflammatory and antioxidant substances known to science. There are currently over 12,000 peer-reviewed studies on curcumin's therapeutic effects, validating virtually every traditional use. Pharmaceutical companies are racing to develop curcumin-based drugs, trying to patent variations of a medicine that Indian grandmothers have been dispensing for millennia. Ashwagandha and stress. The ancient texts describe ashwagandha, Withania somnifera, as a rasayana, a rejuvenating substance that increases strength, vitality, and resilience. Modern research reveals it's an adaptogen that modulates the stress response by regulating cortisol, enhancing GABA signaling, and protecting neurons from oxidative damage. Clinical trials show it's as effective as pharmaceutical anxiolytics, without the side effects. Yoga and the nervous system. Ancient yogic texts, closely connected to Ayurvedic medicine, describe practices for controlling the prana, life force, through breath, posture, and meditation. For centuries, Western science dismissed this as mysticism. Then we discovered the autonomic nervous system, and suddenly it all made sense. Yogic breathing techniques directly influence vagal tone, heart rate variability, and the balance between sympathetic and parasympathetic activation. The ancient yogis weren't controlling mystical energy. They were consciously regulating their nervous system with a precision that modern biofeedback training is still trying to replicate. Triphala and the microbiome. Triphala, a combination of 3 fruits used in Ayurveda for digestive health, was considered a folk remedy. Then the microbiome revolution happened. We discovered that our gut contains trillions of bacteria that influence everything from immunity to mental health. And Triphala, it's a prebiotic, a polyphenol-rich compound that selectively promotes beneficial bacteria while inhibiting pathogenic ones, reduces inflammation, and supports the intestinal barrier. The ancient Indians were doing microbiome medicine before we knew what a microbiome was. But it's not just about validating individual herbs or techniques. It's about the system itself. In 2014, the journal Nature published a groundbreaking paper on personalized medicine, arguing that the future of healthcare lies in treating individuals based on their unique genetic, metabolic, and environmental profiles rather than applying standardized protocols. The paper was celebrated as revolutionary. Ayurvedic physicians reading it must have smiled, because they'd been doing exactly this for 3,000 years. The Prakriti system in Ayurveda classifies individuals into constitutional types based on physical characteristics, physiological tendencies, psychological traits, and disease susceptibility. Modern research has now shown that these Prakriti types correlate with actual genetic variations, metabolic differences, and distinct immunological profiles. What the ancient Indians observed through careful phenotypic classification, we're now confirming through genomic analysis. They reached the same conclusion, just through a different path. And then there's perhaps the most profound revelation of all: consciousness and healing. Ancient Indian medicine never separated the mind from the body. Charaka wrote, "The mind is the cause of both health and disease. A disturbed mind creates disease even in a healthy body, while a peaceful mind maintains health even under adverse conditions." This wasn't poetry. This was clinical observation. The ancient texts describe what we now call psychosomatic illness, the placebo effect, the impact of stress on immunity, and the role of meditation in healing. They developed an entire branch of medicine called Unmada Chikitsa, psychiatry, that treated mental illness not with superstition or exorcism, but with dietary changes, herbal medicines, cognitive therapy, and meditation. Modern psychoneuroimmunology, the study of how psychological processes influence the immune and nervous systems, is essentially rediscovering what the ancient Indians mapped out centuries ago. Studies now show that meditation alters gene expression, reduces inflammation, lengthens telomeres, and literally changes brain structure. The ancient rishis in their caves weren't escaping reality. They were mastering it. But here's where it gets truly extraordinary. In 2019, a team of researchers at the University of California began studying a mysterious phenomenon: cancer remission without medical intervention. Not all cancer remissions, just the rare, spontaneous ones where tumors disappear without chemotherapy, radiation, or surgery. They wanted to know, what do these cases have in common? They found a pattern. Many of these individuals had made radical changes to their lifestyles, diets, and mental states. They'd reduced stress, adopted meditation practices, changed their diets to whole foods and anti-inflammatory compounds, and, perhaps most significantly, found meaning and purpose. The researchers published their findings, noting that these changes appear to activate endogenous healing mechanisms that modern medicine doesn't fully understand. Reading this study, one is struck by an eerie realization. These people, often unknowingly, were following the principles of Ayurvedic Rasayana Chikitsa, rejuvenation therapy. They were addressing the nidana, root causes, correcting the vikruti, imbalance, and supporting the Vyadikshamatva, immunity. They were, in essence, using ancient Indian medicine to heal diseases we consider incurable. This raises an uncomfortable question for modern medicine. What if we've been looking in the wrong places? What if the future of healing isn't in more powerful drugs or more precise surgeries, but in remembering what the ancients knew, that the body has extraordinary self-healing capabilities when the conditions are right? The most cutting-edge research in medicine today on fasting and autophagy, on the anti-inflammatory diet, on breathwork and stress reduction, on the microbiome and immune training, on chronobiology and circadian rhythms. All of it echoes principles that ancient Indian medicine articulated millennia ago. We're not innovating, we're remembering. And perhaps most humbling of all, despite all our technology, all our research, all our pharmaceutical sophistication, ancient Indian medicine still does some things better than we can. The treatment of chronic conditions, the prevention of disease, the maintenance of vitality into old age, the integration of mental and physical health, the sustainability of medical practice, the ethical treatment of patients. In these domains, the ancient system doesn't just compete with modern medicine, it surpasses it. This is the triumph, but also the revelation. We don't need to choose between ancient wisdom and modern science. We need both. The ancient Indians had profound insights but limited technology. We have incredible technology but often limited insight. The future of medicine lies not in rejecting the past, but in integrating it, in combining the holistic understanding of ancient systems with the precision and power of modern techniques. In asking not which is better, but what can each teach the other, and this integration is already beginning. Major medical institutions, Johns Hopkins, Harvard, Stanford, now have departments of integrative medicine that study and apply traditional healing systems alongside conventional treatments. The National Institutes of Health has a division dedicated to complementary and alternative medicine. The World Health Organization has called for the integration of traditional medicine into global health systems. The healing methods of ancient India, suppressed and dismissed for centuries, are being recognized not as historical curiosities, but as viable, valuable, and in many cases superior approaches to human health. The blueprint was never lost. We just forgot how to read it. We began this journey in a temple in Kerala, with a British surgeon discovering manuscripts that challenged everything he knew. We've travelled through the operating theatres of ancient Taxila, witnessed the burning of Nalanda's libraries, explored the systematic dismissal of indigenous knowledge, and arrived, finally, at a moment of rediscovery and integration. But as we stand here, at this intersection of past and future, we must ask ourselves, what does this story really mean? It means that human progress is not linear, that advancement doesn't always mean moving forward. Sometimes it means circling back to pick up what we dropped along the way, that the oldest civilizations sometimes held the deepest wisdom, that in our rush to modernize, mechanize, and monetize, we may have lost something essential about what it means to heal and to be healed. The ancient Indians understood something we're only now remembering, that health is not the absence of disease, but the presence of balance. That healing is not a transaction between doctor and patient, but a partnership between consciousness, body, and cosmos. That medicine is not just a science, but an art, a philosophy, and a spiritual practice. They knew that every plant contains a universe of chemical compounds, evolved over millions of years, far more sophisticated than anything we can synthesize in a laboratory. They understood that the human body is not a machine to be repaired, but an ecosystem to be nurtured. They recognized that the greatest healing comes not from external intervention, but from awakening the body's innate intelligence. And they proved it. For thousands of years, they proved it with successful surgeries, effective treatments, and flourishing health in populations we would consider primitive. But here's the most important lesson from this story. It's not just about ancient India. It's about us, here, now, in this moment. Because every indigenous medical tradition, from traditional Chinese medicine to Native American healing practices, from African botanical medicine to Aboriginal dreamtime healing, contains wisdom that modern science is only beginning to validate. Every culture that lived close to the earth, that observed nature with reverence, that treated the body as sacred, discovered profound truths about health and healing. And all of them are endangered. Languages dying, elders passing away without transmitting their knowledge, traditions dismissed as superstition, plants going extinct before we've studied their properties, practices abandoned in favor of pharmaceutical dependency. We are not just losing ancient knowledge, we are losing human knowledge, the accumulated wisdom of our species. This is the real tragedy and the real opportunity, because we still have time, the texts that survived, the practitioners who remember, the plants that remain, they are still here, waiting for us to listen, to learn, to integrate their wisdom with our technology. The question is, will we? Will we have the humility to learn from our ancestors? Will we have the courage to question our assumptions? Will we have the wisdom to see that progress might mean synthesis rather than replacement? The ancient Indian healers left us a prescription, written not just in Sanskrit manuscripts, but in the very structure of nature itself. It's a prescription for balance, for awareness, for living in harmony with the rhythms of life. It's a prescription that treats not just symptoms, but causes. Not just bodies, but beings. Not just diseases, but the conditions that create disease. And it's a prescription we desperately need. In a world of chronic disease epidemics, antibiotic resistance, mental health crises, and healthcare systems collapsing under their own complexity, the principles of ancient Indian medicine offer not a nostalgic retreat into the past, but a radical reimagining of the future. A future where prevention is valued over intervention, where the doctor's first question is not what do you have, but how are you living, where healing addresses the whole person, not just the broken part, where nature is recognized as the ultimate pharmacy, consciousness as the ultimate physician, and balance as the ultimate goal. This is not fantasy, this is not romanticism, this is practical wisdom, clinically validated, scientifically sound, and desperately needed. The healing methods of ancient India were not ahead of their time. They were beyond time. They understood principles that don't change, truths that don't expire, wisdom that remains relevant across millennia, because it's rooted in the fundamental nature of life itself. And so we return to that temple in Kerala, to Dr. Demock holding those palm leaf manuscripts, realizing that he'd found something more valuable than gold, a map back to our own forgotten genius. The temple is still there, the manuscripts still exist, the knowledge still waits. The question is, will we read it? Will we remember? Will we reclaim what our ancestors knew? That healing is not a procedure performed upon us, but a process we participate in. That health is not something we purchase, but something we cultivate. That the greatest medicine is wisdom, and the greatest physician is the body itself when given what it needs. The ancient Indian healers, those brilliant minds who performed brain surgery while Europe was mired in bloodletting, who understood immunity before we knew what cells were, who mapped consciousness before we invented psychology. They whisper to us across the centuries. You don't need to discover anything new. You need to remember what you forgot. The blueprint was always there, in nature, in the body, in the breath, in the silence beneath thought. We didn't invent healing. We only learned to participate in it. And now we pass that learning to you. Listen, remember, heal. Because the most advanced medicine isn't what we'll discover in the future, it's what we've forgotten from the past. And the most profound revelation isn't what's yet to come, it's what's been here all along, waiting for us to open our eyes. The lost blueprint of healing was never lost. We just stopped looking at it. But now we're remembering. And in that remembering lies not just the history of medicine, but its future. Not just the story of ancient India, but the story of humanity itself. A species capable of forgetting its greatest wisdom and brave enough to rediscover it. The healing has already begun. The ancient knowledge is awakening. The blueprint is being read. And you, listening to this story, you are part of that awakening. Because knowledge, like healing, is not passive. It requires participation. It requires you to question, to explore, to integrate, to apply. The ancient Indian physicians left us more than techniques and formulas. They left us a question that echoes through time. Will you be a partner in your own healing? Will you take responsibility not just for treating disease, but for creating health? Will you remember that you are not a machine to be fixed, but a living system capable of profound self-regeneration when given the right conditions? Answer that question. Live that answer. And in doing so, you won't just be honoring ancient wisdom. You'll be creating the medicine of tomorrow. This is the lost blueprint, not lost anymore. Found, remembered, and ready to heal a world that desperately needs it. The journey doesn't end here. It begins here. Welcome home to what you always knew. Welcome back to the ancient future of healing.